share, and we are going to start. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to listen. I can only assume that a whole dozen people are listening to this right now, that we're reaching an audience maybe numbering in the tens or in the teens. So by way of introduction, I'm Kitsune. If you're here, you probably have followed me on Twitter and have read some of my writings. I put out a staggering amount of one article a month, really very productive, very proliferate. In my day job, I work for a crypto fintech. I work a lot in strategy and success. And then in my spare time, I think and I write a lot about governance, none of which is really important or for any of this, because I doubt I'll be talking about any of that. But what I think is important, the only thing I want to touch on is before I was in crypto, I was a bartender for a really long time. And one of the things I loved most about that was the conversations that I got to have unexpectedly and kind of without direction, that all ended up kind of at unexpected and wonderful places, and went a long way to expanding my viewpoint and my thoughts and what I was interested in. I think crypto Twitter has a lot of that as well. I think that's very similar. So I wanted to start kind of just an interview series, because, it's like when you think of great interviewers, it's like, it's Howard Stern, David Letterman, and then me, like a autistic anime Fox fanboy on the internet, probably all line up to be the best interviewers in the game. And very graciously, self-deprecation aside, very graciously, our first guest, which sounds so proper, that sounds so fine and real, is Carnation. So Carn, if you want to give a little brief introduction of yourself, I'm sure, you have a much bigger following than me. Your engagement is incredible. So I'm sure people tuning who are listening to this are much more familiar with who you are than who I am. But yeah, if you just want to give a little brief intro to yourself.
Yeah, so I'm actually very new to crypto Twitter. Started in maybe November of 2021, and I sort of just took on a personality of its own. And since then, I've been talking to a lot of people, and it's really a wonderful place. I feel like I've learned a lot. I'm sure we'll get into the details later, but recently I've decided to stop my IRL work commitments and go crypto full time. So now I am the yield and treasury manager over at Umami Finance, as well as some other cool side DGEM projects that are in the works.
It's funny. I think that we kind of started in crypto Twitter at the same time, or at least you were one of the first people I was really aware of who kind of had I don't know, an authentic voice and personality and sense of self. And, kind of shamelessly, now that we're through the serious introduction stuff, very shamelessly, I really deliberately kind of wanted to be your friend and get to know you. Do you remember when we first met? Or met is a funny term.
No, I'm just thinking about it now. I don't know. If I had to guess, it was probably over one of Indigo's fanboy stummy posts.
Yeah, it is very shameful. Arguably some of the greatest minds in the space right now just probably meet overdoing femboy shit posting, because that's the meta, or at least it was a meta at the time. And I think now it's kind of evolved. I've said before, is a cultural signifier of being kind of this anti-trad, very degen persona, is well, if you post femboy shit, then you're clearly not, some Patagonia vest wearing motherfucker.
For sure.
Yeah. I was just curious, it is funny. I feel like our first encounters, our first kind of sessions of bonding were much less around anything to do with cryptocurrency or Web3, but so much more to do with poetry.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an organic segue, I guess. Why poetry as the a weird subculture on crypto Twitter? Where do you think that comes from, that fascination with poetry?
I think it's really about trying to get to, the bottom of things, like this whole game in the markets, these numbers, like they look real, but there's a lot going on beneath the surface. And for whatever reason, we attract a bunch of really introspective people, as well as people who are really deep into thinking. And it's like, I guess it sort of comes naturally that we sort of examine the world around us with that same analytical mindset, like no matter where we look. And poetry just seems to be one of those things that, oh, I noticed something today. Like, let me try to express it in a way and make it fun, right? Because, well, I don't know, people think poetry is creative, but in a way, it's actually quite rigid. There are all these like rules and forms you have to follow, and that actually makes it a lot of fun. So, like the number of syllables, the rhymes, like everything fits really nicely together. And I think we I mean, I put it out there, and it's nice because I know people like you who understand these things. You appreciate the amount of depth that actually went into it. I know also, like, just appreciating like the words and rhythm itself on the surface is nice, but I feel like actually on CT, like people have the ability to see really deep into it, and some of the stuff it resonates with them, I think.
I think that's so true. And it's funny, like the analytical side of things is something that doesn't always occur to me right away with poetry. And I wonder, like, do you think there's also an element of like the romanticism to it,
Mm,
right? Like there is something inherently kind of wistful and questing and yearning about poetry. In the same way that I think there is something kind of romantic in the aspirations that so many people
yes.
hold for,
Mm,
a decentralized future, an egalitarian finance, something that I think both of them are very much tied to a dissatisfaction with the way that things work in everyday life. Right? Like I think
mm,
that poetry is an outlet in the same way like developing in DeFi as an outlet are both, rooted in this sense of like my life should be different or my rich interior world does not match the
mm.
world that has been prescribed for me, right? Like
Yeah.
uh, that seems to also be a common thread to me. It's like and when we started when you and I first started talking about our poetry club, I was really genuinely surprised at the amount of people on crypto Twitter who were like past poetry appreciators or who were writing poetry very quietly by themselves.
Mm.
And just it never crossed over into, um, kind of the quote unquote mainstream of what crypto Twitter is. Not to be clear, not that I think we're in the mainstream at all. I think I think there's a lot of people, there's a lot of, six-figure accounts out there that are what we might consider the mainstream, but
Mm.
certainly in the echo chamber that I feel like we occupy, it felt very significant that so many people were engaged with poetic thought or poetic practice to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I think you really hit a point there, like romanticism and idealism. Like we're all here because we see the future for what it could be, and we're largely dissatisfied with the way it is now. Like I certainly am. Like a few years ago, well, 2 years ago, the whole reason I got into crypto was the pandemic lockdown started, and I was pretty deep into poverty, right? Like I can live, but my savings and everything are all completely dry, and that was like not really any way to exist in the world. Like it wasn't a good place to be. Um, and yeah, once I found crypto, what it meant to me was that I can use my own skills and talent to come up with strategies, and like, and seeing it pay off. It's like, yeah, like this is a world where I can actually be effective. I can be an agent of change. To the minimum, it's an agent of change in my own life, and hopefully, like as we go in the space and gather more influence and like friends, we can start to actually implement some of our ideas for the general public. And that's a really lofty goal. And I think along the way, um, the poems we write or the articles we put out are sort of a call to arms in a way. Another way is just to put out our spirit and inspiration out there for everyone to see that if they're having similar thoughts in their heads, that they're really not alone. Yeah.
I think there's so much to dive into with that. I mean, you touch on so many things there, and there's so which is amazing. You know, I think it's just kind of speaks to the nature of our space, and I think it speaks a lot to you as an individual in the way you identify it. You know, very transparently, I also really went deep into crypto at the start of the pandemic lockdowns for largely the same reasons. For figuring out, how do I exist in this world? How do I live? How do you live without, I think the main thing being kind of in thrall to an economic system that isn't built for you.
Mhm.
And I think, crypto tends to attract outsider personalities as well as poetry, right? It tends to attract a kind of person who feels at odds with the reality that they're meant to live in. And before we, because I mean, there's so much to cover in terms of your original work, and your kind of strategic work that I really want to cover, because it's
Mm.
usually sewn over my head. I mean, there's nothing like getting a DM from you and being like, "Hey, I got some new alpha to share," and it's like totally something I've never fucking heard of, or that I've ever even considered. But I think before touching on that, I was going to ask,
Mm.
like, do you feel, when you got into this world, this crypto world over these last like 2.5 years, do you feel like you approached it with a kind of, I don't want to say like deliberate narrative or deliberate mindset, but you have kind of a very established personal brand and like a personal aesthetic,
Mm.
style of writing, style of speech, way that you approach others. I was wondering, like, was there any, there are some people who have very clearly considered kind of entry points, and
Yes.
you're this, not to use the word character, but this like
Mm.
being that is Carnation. What was kind of like how did you as a person in this space come about?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess, as with everything in life, it's a little entangled and it's hard to separate into neat little categories or boxes. So basically, there are 2 points I touch on. One is that it's absolutely all very real and sincere. And two is that it's absolutely a game and everything is calculated. So how does that work? Um, so
That is so fucking on the money. That is
So
yeah,
let me
no,
just first say,
yeah.
like, everything I say, like, it absolutely comes from the heart and the mind and the soul. Because for a very long time in real life, I don't feel like I was expressing myself very truly or authentically. Like, a lot of my thoughts and everything, they had nowhere to go. Like, it's like screaming into the void, and there isn't even a void to catch my voice. And
Yeah.
so essentially on crypto Twitter, when I started, it was sort of a promise to myself that I'd be whoever I wanted to be and to just do whatever it is that I wanted to do. Like, like free speech, right? Like, let's just have it out there, like, um, my real identity isn't attached to this account, so I can just
Mhm.
let it really roam free. And so in that sense, like, yeah, it's all, um, the three words are like honest, direct, unfiltered. That's how I want it to be. And so
Yeah.
far, I think I really satisfied myself to the degree that I was able to do that. Um, and on the other end, like, it was all very calculated and gamed, in the sense that when I was growing up, my dad was a business person, and where we originated from, like, business was very much a social game. There were norms you followed,
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
there were pleasantries, a certain way to do things. You approach people like with goals, but you also have to make sure you align your incentives, whether that's just through, good negotiations, or sometimes down to things we'd consider like under the table deals or bribing. But then again, like, it sounds a little unsavory, but I think overall that's how humans work. Like,
I think that's
this,
so, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. Can I ask, like,
sure.
this idea of authenticity is something I like to connect to the
Mm,
idea of sincerity, and I think, there's a kind of sincerity is almost sometimes a dirty word, but like the idea of sincerity in being genuine in affect, but also genuine in intention and genuine
Yes.
in your voice. And obviously our space is not rife with sincerity, and that's
Mhm.
kind of like a super self-explanatory. I'm not saying anything new there, right? Like there's scammers and people who have different identities, and there are people who rug, and there are people who LARP, etc. But there are, I think, particularly in our corner of the space, there are people who you could say are very sincere in the sense that they are not changing themselves very much, right? Like, pulling someone just totally off the top of my head, I feel like Lawrence Day is like a great example, like just totally unabashedly publicly himself, but in the same way, like, so are people like, I don't know, like Nose Drop or God King or 48, these people who are just like super, blunt representations of themselves.
Yes.
Where it like differentiates for me is like you have a elegance, a grace, a kind of kindness in your sincerity that I think is really what makes you stand out, right? Like
Right.
assuming everyone's intentions are good is, I think, a very difficult thing to do. And I think a lot of what you've built on is, really being in yourself a very sincere and genuine person. Like, and certainly in the way that not to
Mhm.
just have this be a whole thing of talking how cool I think you are, but the way that you choose to spend your time with people, you're very open with
Mhm.
people. Do you think like people responded to that more than any
Yes.
alpha or any writing? Is it
Yes.
that is your sincerity maybe the kind of like
Sure.
root of your success?
And okay, I'm going to ramble a little bit, but I think there is actually a very deep hole we can go into, and this is also potentially alfalfa for dealing with people. So I've taken this leadership course, and in one of the lessons, it's like how do you properly listen to people? And I really liked how it was presented. So what I learned from the class was we can roughly categorize listening to, let's say, 3 levels. So level 1, listening, is just paying attention to the words that someone is speaking. So for example, in a classroom, if you were doing a level 1 listening, you heard what the teacher said. They said, this assignment was due on that date. Okay, you remembered or you noted it down and you paid attention. That's all good. You understood the words. So like below that is, when, let's say, partners fight, it's because one wasn't even paying attention, one was being distracted, and the words didn't even register in their brain. So that's like not listening, or level 0 listening. And level 2 listening, it's starting to get beyond the physical meaning of listening. So here we're observing people when they talk. We're observing the things that go unsaid. So one way to put it is like reading between the lines, or understanding what is not being said, what is just being implied. And this is a level that most people with some thought and training and concentration, they can reach like pretty decently. Um, and it's a very useful skill. But the next level beyond that, I think, is where the magic starts. So level 3 listening is when you listen to someone or converse with them, you're not even focused on the words anymore. You're trying to figure out. Um, so I like to always bring it back to like the 3 main things. It's like hopes, dreams, and biggest fears. Trying to understand, the essence of this person's being, like what their purpose of existence was and what their largest, pain points and suffering is. And once you see someone that way, you've understood them in a way that probably no one else in their life ever has, right? So I've had many experiences where I just meet with strangers, like just, on travels or in events, and things just kick off and we talk for a night, and they've often say at the end of it that that was the most genuine and deepest connection they ever had with someone, and it's with me, a total and absolute stranger. And it's also magic for me, like chances are we never meet and talk again, but it leaves their life leaves an impression on me, and I
Sure.
believe my listening left an impression on them. And how I would phrase that experience is we're bearing witness to their soul. I think a lot of what drives humans is not that we need our problems solved. We just want someone to witness our suffering and acknowledge that we're trying our best.
I mean, that's right. That is the fundamental human desire. And I feel like, I have experienced those moments myself, and they've been incredibly impactful. Can I ask, how do you think that plays in the virtual realm, right? We're not face to face with people. We're not sitting at we're not sitting in an airport bar having a conversation with a total stranger who we can even, witness and perceive and judge their like body language, or make inferences. How do you achieve that level of connection? Oftentimes not even speaking, right? But typing, like, wait, how does that process occur in the digital space?
Right. So anyone who's ever talked to me, like on text, they know how I write. I write in scrambled little chunks, like often like very long paragraphs, but broken over 100 DMs. That's also why I get Twitter jailed a lot, because Twitter thinks I'm a spam bot. And so how we create connection, to me, I feel like it's just, like reacting in some way. So I really like Twitter, well, as well as Discord, because you can react to the things people say, and with a wide range of emotes or the little stickers, and I think that makes people feel like they've seen you read what they write in real time and reacting to it, sort of like how we have body language.
Totally.
In real life.
It's funny. I mean, that is literally the origin of like the Japanese chat room emoticons and emojis that predated things, the old IRC language. Right. Like, we want to show people, I don't know if you've seen what the Zoomers are doing with this. This is now I'm going to sound like an old man shit, but people are starting incorporating like tone indicators into messages online to imply, oh, am I being sarcastic? Am I being genuine with this? What is my tone? And I think it is an interesting solution to the problem. But I mean, really, without heart reacts, there's very little to know of how someone reacted to something. And it is interesting. I'm sure eventually we'll all be in VR chat and we'll be able to emote to a more expressive degree, but that these indicators are used to kind of show and make connection and talk, for lack of a better term, like no longer with our hands or with our bodies, but with kind of secondary or graphical methods. And
that's a small part of it, I want to say. Like, well, first of all, like, I haven't met anyone who use these things as often as I do. So maybe in that sense, like, I'm really trying to be expressive. But the other one is just through text or talking to someone, like, the most important part to make sure that the other person feels understood is you being able to repeat back to them what it is they said in different words. That shows that you've been paying attention, that you've been listening, and you've understood it enough that you can phrase it in your, again, like in your own words. And the second one is to be able to ask people really deep questions to push them really far. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated questions. It's like, why do you say that? Why do you think that? What effect did that have on you?
that is so interesting.
Yes.
And so telling, because that is something you do a lot, like when we talk, and it makes for like a really engaged and active conversation. It is one, and it's also one of those things like you don't really notice. I think, if there was one thing I ever learned, it's that people just genuinely really want to talk about themselves in a way that feels organic and natural. And those kind of like clarifying questions or reiterations are really an invitation to people to talk about themselves or to talk about their ideas or expound on it. It's funny hearing that expressed because it is very much, having experienced it from you several times, it is funny.
Yeah, and if I can add one more point to that, it's like, we're surrounded by people who are very much like us. Like you said, it's kind of an echo chamber. So something that I really like to do, like, it's actually fun for me, is to play the other side. Like, I'll playfully say, let me be the devil's advocate here, and I will challenge you on all your assumptions. in absolutely the kindest way, right? But it's like, let's explore these ideas down to as far as our minds could take. And that means someone has to sort of take the other side and question everything.
Without blowing up a thing that is, I think, still technically supposed to be relatively secret, but you and I are members of one of those stereotypical, like, shadowy crypto Twitter groups that people always joke about existing, even though ours, I feel like, is more of a shit posting engine than anything else. But within like these like niche groups, do you feel that you get to drop one layer when you're in them? Like, for example, if we're in our like group chat with the rest of the degenerates we know, do you feel that there is a proximity there that is removed from even your like public posting persona? Do you feel like more at ease with these people?
Yes and no, right? Like, I would say it's like talking in public versus talking in private with someone. Like,
Mm-hmm.
in a group chat or a group Discord, it's like halfway in between. Like, if everyone you know there is someone you've had private conversations with, then it's just sort of like a party, like a gathering with friends. But like, if there are people who you don't really know there, like, it sort of leans more towards just in public. I'm not saying I would be more careful around what I post, but it's like, like, we have these automatic thoughts that are sometimes incomplete, or it could be misconstrued in some way. Just bad takes, basically. Sometimes even really bad humor.
Bad takes? You're kidding me. No way. I look, as someone who loves giving bad takes and bad humor, I mean, I think that is instantly recognizable. I think it's interesting just the way
Mm,
people approach it. And I think maybe I would even feel differently if I felt like I had more to contribute in like a more tangible, practical sense. I mean, it is always kind of, crypto Twitter is very much that first day at school feeling, kind of again and again and again. Because there's like there are like popular kids, there are icons, there are people that do very specific things.
mm,
And, as someone who's like the proverbial, I don't know, like stoner who's not on any real sports teams, I definitely understand there's that watching what you say. I mean, the real reason I ask that, and I love that we get to spend most of our time talking about community things, is like one of the things that I focus on and that you and I talk about a lot is making these genuine connections
mm.
from behind, a cartoon drawing of a fictional character, really reaching out and feeling like connected to people. I feel like there are people who have, found a way to really bridge that gap. I don't know if everyone can.
Point I that grabbed my attention there was, like, how transactional the space is,
Mhm.
and maybe that is sort of a dirty word, because it is and it doesn't have to be. So
Sure.
my mind is, like, of course we can make this completely PvP, and a lot of people do, especially like the traders, like, essentially, yeah, like, their gain is someone's loss because there's someone on the other side. But there's also, simultaneously a dozen other games we could be playing. So, like, this whole space, we didn't get to, like, over $2 trillion market cap if there was no real value being generated somehow. And we could come together in a way where we can build things or create things that do have lasting value and impact. And in that sense, I don't think it's transactional at all. Like, I've been thinking a lot about how we can align people's incentives together, be it, the builders, the community, and the investors. And yeah, like, absolutely, it's hard to do, but of course, we can always do better. And in an ideal world that, of course, I don't know how to get to exactly yet, but I think we can be overall largely aligned through, creating better systems, seeing what works and what doesn't. Sometimes that's through tokenomics, but other times it's just about building relationships and trust.
Well, that's actually, I mean, that's kind of a great transition. If I mean, you are involved in so many things, but you had kind of called out Umami at the start. Um, I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit, if you're cool with that,
Sure.
mainly because I feel like, um, Umami. Hopefully everyone listening knows about it because I'm a big fan, and I think you've done a great job of promoting it. But if you wanted to kind of give like your elevator pitch of what you're working on there, I think
Sure.
there'd be a lot to dive into there.
Wonderful. Yeah. So the 2-minute pitch about Umami is that it used to be an Ohm fork. It accumulated a decent sized treasury. And we've seen that, the Ohm model isn't quite sustainable, or at least it shouldn't be trading so high. So what all the Ohm based projects have decided is to sort of pivot away from that. And so how Umami is doing it, we're located in the Arbitrum ecosystem, and we're trying to be the 3-3 spirit embodied by helping other projects succeed. So what does that look like exactly? So what I do for Umami is yield management. So one is we're managing the yield of our treasury to be very high yield while not being overly exposed to market movements. So in that way, we're helping the people who decide to invest with us. Um, the other part is we're seeking out partnerships with almost all the projects on Arbitrum to try to see if we can collaborate on some strategies together. For example, like a lot of DeFi still lacks automation, and we have a great dev team over at Umami. So we're talking to these teams to see if we can build any automatic vaults, that saves the users gas fees, that auto compounds for them, and that helps also the other team have a better experience for their users because their devs are also at full bandwidth. So in that sense, like, we are trying our best to come up with things that really makes everyone win, and I think it's doable because we're kicking off a lot of partnerships. We have a lot of products in the works.
Can I ask, it's not to be controversial
Mm.
in any way, but I think touching on the origin of being an Ohm fork, right? Like, there are so many, I think, postmortem, and postmortem might be a bit of a grand term because I don't think everything is dead yet. But I do think that there was something culturally that happened around the inception of Ohm, and the creation of all of these other sympathetic projects, some of which we seen fail really spectacularly, right? Like Snowbank. I'm now
Oh, I was
poor.
there.
I'm now personally poor because of Snowbank. I'm now personally poor because of Invictus.
Do you remember Snow Dog?
Yeah. Oh, well, look, I mean, I thought that was funny. And then I immediately was like, well, I honestly do think this might mean that we're all fucked. But from kind of a macro level, from like the part of it that's interesting to me, because, and people can say whatever they want about the tokenomics, about the structure. It was that Ohm seemed to rely on some game theoretic assumptions that I don't think, ended up being valid. And I think kind of my larger question is like, if we have now witnessed that the Ponzonomics of these are not necessarily feasible, and that cooperation is not maybe going to be 100% every time, and that the 3-3 mentality was, some could argue, maybe like inadvertently harmful
Right.
to a lot of people. How do we, is the question like, how do we prove that we are different than this? How do we keep going? Because Umami started as the 0-2 Ohm,
0 to
right?
Ohm. Yep.
Yeah. So I always am just curious, like, repositioning in an age where maybe the press has gotten a little bad, or the outlook is not as rosy, is really interesting to me. So
Yeah.
I wonder, like, did you, early on with Ohm, when you saw this kind of meta happening, like, you're a person who thinks a lot about sustainable yields. You're a person who thinks a lot about delta
Yeah.
neutral yields. And you're a person that thinks a lot about collaboration. Like, what did you think the first time you saw the, fucking
Yeah.
3-3 bullshit start?
So actually, Ohm was the start of my DeFi journey, in the sense that I think it was um, after the summer of, when did this start? 2021. Yeah. So actually, I've been on chain doing DeFi stuff for not that long, actually, for around half a year. Like before that, I was mostly on centralized exchanges, figuring out how to use bots to run strategies such as like indexing or a little bit of market making. And then I figured out that the tokens there actually existed on these things called blockchains, and they actually perform functions there. And I started learning about them. So seeing some videos about Ohm, it was really intriguing because these things never existed before, either in real life or on the centralized exchanges. And I just knew that I had to gamble a little bit and just participate, right? Because it felt like there was something there. I didn't know enough at the time, but the system seems to have held up. So I bought in, and I've seen my net worth rise astronomically past that, and then astronomically down again, because my thesis going into it was just the backing. Like, of course, people say, you can't redeem treasury, but I think that's, everything's a meme. Like at the end, like the value of a token is just a meme. Prices are not real. It's just what they're currently trading at. And essentially, I was just thinking that, like I'm getting more tokens over time, and each token has this base amount of value. So as long as I hold it long enough, I will have a huge amount of tokens worth of base value. And that was just my thesis going into it. I didn't care about any of the other stuff because that seemed to make sense to me. So already before then, I knew I was in the long game, and that's why I didn't sell the top. But that's okay. No regrets. It was my strategy.
It's okay. I've never sold the top in my life. I've only ever bought the top.
Yeah. And essentially, like a quick post-mortem, like my thought on it, I'm not going to say whether Ohm has value or doesn't have value, because I don't think that question really makes sense. Where I think my understanding of why it fell apart was that the incentives were not aligned. So the introduction of 99, which is when people deposit their Ohm into Rari to borrow more money to buy Ohm, that created this group of people who gained more yield than the rest. And when you have two groups of people with different levels of yield, the group with higher yield is diluting the rest, right? And when that happens, like in a normal project, you call that unfair. And well, yeah, like it is unfair in the sense that not everyone's getting the same treatment, but this is a game we're playing. So the people who get higher yield, they must take profit at some point because, like you're greedy, but you have to be greedy to take it back into profits. So anyway, like once this whole mania started, which I do not understand why, I probably think it's because of these 99 people actually, because the amount of leverage introduced into the system was insane. So that drove prices up, and it's sort of reflexive at that point. And on the way down, it's also reflexive. As soon as the 99 people start selling, the 99 people who don't sell on time get liquidated, which is actually also another form of forced selling. And also just everyone who bought the top also started selling. Anyway, so the whole system comes down, but you know what? Like at the end of it, like we're way below my entry price point from like half a year ago, but I'm still up because the whole point was getting the rebases. And yeah, like another point there, it's kind of alfalfa, but also just to be clear, nothing said here is financial advice. I'm not a
I
financial
mean,
advisor.
certainly,
Yeah,
certainly nothing from me.
yeah,
In fact,
but
just counter trade
mhm.
everything that I possibly say here. Just do the fucking opposite.
Yeah, yeah. And basically, like another issue with Ohm is that if everyone's staked, there's no liquidity. Like, of course, Ohm has a huge
Right.
amount of protocol Ohm liquidity, but what's actually even better is that if you incentivize Ohm to be paired with other tokens, so like right now, what I am doing personally is I have a lot of wrapped Ohm, like GOM, paired with other tokens like ETH, AVAX, and Phantom, and they're earning a lot of yield. So this way, I'm reducing my exposure to GOM while actually earning more yield on it. And it's a pretty great system because when Ohm goes down in price, the portion of my LP that is earning yield increases. And if Boom goes up in price, then well, there's nothing to complain. So and also this helps the health of all the ecosystems because now everyone who LPs, their GOM becomes a productive asset earning yield, and it also becomes a contribution to the total amount of liquidity in the system. And the more liquidity there is, the harder it is to push price around.
Sure.
Yeah.
I
So like,
think,
yes.
it's even for someone like me who absolutely does not understand a lot of the very smart things. Like it does seem like liquidity as a service, right? Or liquidity as a mechanism is like the way through this. And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, it does feel like that is kind of where Umami is heading, is really utilizing their assets, their treasury
Yes.
assets, to try and provide and fill these liquidity gaps and generate yield off of it. Do you see like the evolution of these platforms of Ohm forks, maybe even of Ohm itself, as moving in that kind of more, I don't want to say straightforward of a direction, but more of a mechanism by which somebody marinates, in the case of Umami, and receives yield, and that's kind of the end of, they don't have to formulate a delta neutral LP farming strategy on their own. They're more just buying into a product, I guess, in a roundabout way. Is that like what you think the future, like where we're headed?
Yeah, I mean, like at the end of the day, like there's only I'm gonna guess a few hundred people in crypto who actually think about how to come up with like strategies that could be automated and scaled. And it's like, yeah, like at the end of the day, what most other people want is to do things with their lives. They don't want to be staring at charts. They don't want to be, trying to figure out how DeFi money Legos work, where the potential downfalls are, what the risks are. Like they want, so money to me and to a lot of people is freedom to do other things.
Completely.
Right. And like sort of slightly off topic, but the whole reason I'm in DeFi is one, that it's interesting to me, it clicks for me, but also my end goal is to come up with, like strategies or products that everyone can use as a way to preserve their life savings or even to grow wealth, so then they can be freed up to pursue whatever it is they wish to pursue, to never have to be coerced by life circumstances into situations they don't want to be in. So yeah, like that aside, like a lot of these projects, including Umami, like our goal is to sort of start building up towards that. Like that is still a very lofty goal. So we're just building, I wouldn't say small, but it's like little stepping stones towards getting us there. Like each product we build, like eventually the whole vision will come together. We will have like this integrated DeFi where everyone can just come in with either stable coins, ETH, or whatever tokens, or even just a credit card, and we'll be able to zap them into a vault, and they will know like roughly what the risks are, what the returns are, and then they can go about their lives without worrying too much.
Do you think like the hesitation for some people, and I feel like this is a common hesitation, is, well, I already have so little money. How they want it to grow fast, right? Everyone's looking for that big come up.
Yes.
But as like a an investor facing product at the end of the day, because that's what it is. And certainly when we've talked about it before, like this is it is a yield bearing investment vehicle at the end of the day, is where these things are heading, and stripping away the elements of complexity, I think, are like the key ways to get right. If people are buying with a credit card, right, you have to remove as many layers of ambiguity as humanly possible, right? You have to make it simple. That's something I do a lot in my day job, is how do you onboard these people who are non-crypto natives into the system,
right?
Do and certainly I think looking at the APY that Olympus, that Snowbank, that these X million whatever APYs, right? I mean, should that have been a red flag to us? Do you think should that have maybe been something that we should have been more concerned about?
Yeah. So this is something I don't have my mind made up yet regarding how much safety rails we should put for people. Because like again, like I'm into the idea of a permissionless space. Like people should be allowed to ape into whatever it is that they want, like with as little due diligence as they want, because after all, we allow people to gamble in the casinos. Like, how is this any different or like any
Yeah.
worse than that, right? Like people, well, first of all, it's like freedom to do what they want. But at the same time, it's like, I really wish people were a little more conservative
Yeah. Yeah.
regarding like their choices. Because yeah, like when you look at something that is so outlandish, it should trigger some I want to say not red flags, but bells and whistles
Yeah.
to really understand what's going on. And yeah, like just one small note on that, it's like APYs are not real.
Right.
Because a lot of it is just things being printed out of nowhere, and it's just a number calculated based on the current value of the token. But yeah, like long term, anything with a high APY, if there's nothing underneath it, it goes to zero.
Well,
Yeah.
and I guess that's that's interesting if we're talking about the say non-crypto consumer for a minute that's seen the 1%
Yes.
savings account that is theoretically supposed to do
Yes.
anything for them, which it's absolutely not. You're not even beating inflation, right? Do you think there is there a middle ground there? Because I feel like your biggest DeFi heads, your like biggest yield mercenaries, right?
Yes.
They're looking for those insane percentages.
Gotcha.
And they can take advantage of them.
Yeah.
Is there a world where we have, I think what
Yes.
Umami right now is 45, 49%. Is that maybe like, more realistic or not even realistic? Is that something that does not seem outlandish?
Right. So I think where this goes is why we get such high APYs is because we're experimenting. Everything is experimental. So of course there are risks involved, and some of that risk is completely unquantifiable. Like some black swans, we just don't know how likely they are to occur. For example, there could always be a new hack out on some like fundamental ETH function, like or a library like the next day. Like we just don't know. There are too many smart people out there, both changing things for the better and perhaps for the worse. But what I do want to say is there is a useful way to think about it where we can transfer risk onto people for a price. So for example, we can do multiple layers of this. So just hypothetically, we can have Umami on the top where like this is completely experimental. Like we say that it's overall pretty much delta neutral and it gives this pretty high insane yield. But below that, we can have partners, for example, like centralized finance apps who say, okay, well, we're actually just going to promise our users half of that, and we're willing to take the residual, whatever excess or deficit that comes out to be. And so in that sense, like we could, at the end of the day, give users a fixed yield. And that is going to be high, much higher in comparison to their less than 1% in a bank account. And we can have the centralized entities in between who are regulated and follows all the proper consumer protection rules such that the investors' funds, like the end user, the retail, they're protected. And I think that would be at least a good next step for DeFi to evolve into. Yeah. So then the people can choose at which level of degeneracy and risk taking they want to take.
You think that's the end game? Or not the end game, but I think next step is the right thing. Do you think the next step is having these traditional finance institutions recognizing the possibility for yield above and beyond what they've had before and repackaging it as a product? I mean, I get, that's kind of a broad question, but Umami could function in a way hypothetically, or any kind of similar product could function in a way that it is essentially the back end yield generation for a company, right? That's then making that.
So I think there are two parts. Like one is that I have definitely seen several examples of centralized exchanges or centralized financial apps starting to do this, where they're the middleman between a DeFi yield source and the retail, and they're coming up with some sort of give and take in the middle with some insurance promises, things like that. Currently they're quite small because I guess like to be 100% compliant with like the strictest rules, it's still quite difficult. And I think that's why the large institutions have not gotten in yet. But where we could see the end game goal is that we can have decentralized versions of everything in between. So for example, like we have decentralized contracts that allow people to split up risk. So we have like apps that do like what do they call them? Like tranches of risk, like senior and junior tranche. So we have a decentralized way to parse that out. We also have decentralized insurance protocols. They're still growing. They're still quite young. But my hope is that, like at the minimum, we have all these parts now. And once they grow to a certain maturity, the minimum we can do is sort of assemble them together exactly as they're mirrored in TradFi.
Sure.
And we can have this system work as it does in TradFi now, but just decentralized. But maybe there are even better things we can do on top. And I'm happy to share some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, at this point, I'm more or less just like taking in all of the alpha you're giving. I mean, if I had one just like quick aside question, do you think like we've been seeing decentralized verifiable identity become a topic either through things like NFTs, POAPs, or the new one Verity? I don't know if you saw this the other day, right? So all of these, to me, right, coming from a corporate world, the intention with these is to mitigate on some level counterparty risk, like a sanctions level, a money laundering level, and when we talk about strict compliance, right, it's the lending rates on say Aave look really appealing to Morgan Stanley, let's just say, whatever. They, to try and stay compliant, right, have to know something about who they're lending with, or they have to know something about who they're borrowing from, et cetera, or what they're going to get to bed with. So I think, all of these steps of trying to apply identity is like the precursor to this. And I think it is like a direct way for TradFi to try and make entrances, because they can go, well, we are interacting with this protocol that requires this certain level of decentralized identity verification somewhere down the line.
Right.
So we have eliminated the risk on our end. So we are, in terms of legal compliance, regulatory compliance, we are protected. Our users are protected. But at the same time, is that like not the end of everything in a certain way, right? Because when the suits show up and they want to know, well, where are you getting your money? Where does it go? Where that puts everything into kind of almost right back where we were 10 years ago.
I see what you mean. Okay, I'm just going to preface this with I might completely be wrong, and but it's like maybe we'll have these two separate financial systems coexisting on the blockchain, and very similar to how we have in the real world a tracked financial system and an untracked one. The untracked one being, like either a cash system or even back to just bartering. Sorry, not bargaining. But yeah, like we have already examples of how we can get this very monitored and regulated space versus a sort of underground shadow economy coexisting in the real world. And on the blockchain, how I think that could play out is you have these institutions who want KYC and they want all their users to follow these, so everything is above board, and I think that's perfectly fine. I totally welcome TradFi to come into the space and also like buy our bags, please.
I mean, that's the real goal, right? We got to unload on somebody. It might as well be them.
Exactly. But also like to achieve the same benefits on blockchain as, for example, like credit lending, like under collateralized, like I think that's actually doable. Again, like those mechanisms may or may not exist, but I'm thinking about, let's say, Gearbox, where you have these accounts that have multi-party control. And on the other side, let's say, I don't know exactly how Gearbox works, but how I imagine it to work is that the smart contract can liquidate everything inside this if it follows under some certain conditions. For example, the total value falling below a certain value. And in that sense, then, like, we can have mechanisms to achieve all the same functions in TradFi. We just need to be a little smarter about how we do it. And I think, like, again, Gearbox is a great example where they found a way to achieve, like, basically like getting a lot of credit without needing the person to put down a huge amount of collateral, without needing to KYC.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the idea of having this two-pronged system makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's kind of inevitable where it's heading in that place. I mean, I wonder, there are definitely those purists among us who don't want any TradFi money, and I definitely welcome just any more entrance into the space. At the same time, though, it feels like we are now more, and particularly protocols that are giving some type of yield to users are under the gun and under the regulatory gaze more than they have ever been. I think even for these centralized exchanges, like the Coinbase 4% APY, whatever. I think, do you think that the government is just like they're so far in over their heads that they can't even begin to understand how they would start regulating something that is go look at any tulip farm, for example, like something that is generating a leverage farm that's pumping out 6,000% APY.
I mean, I'm not deeply involved in the political space, and I actually haven't talked to any political people. For any of my friends I've talked to, if you're a Fed, please let me know so I can finally ask you.
There's at least one Fed in the group chat for sure.
Yeah. And essentially, like, I'm just purely speculating here. It's that governments are afraid in the sense that this is money they don't control. And it's not like a new concept to them. Like, each country mostly controls their own currency. And they are very wary of all the other national currencies and how that interplays with their own economies, basically. And right now, crypto is still very small compared to that. But let's say crypto rises what it already has to a market cap or the economic activity of small nations. If this trend continues, like, crypto on its own is going to be a digital sovereign economy, I guess. And all the governments will have to figure out a way to have economic policies against it. Like, so for example, like, we can consider what happened to Coinbase or something as sort of like economic sanctions, like, you're not allowed to do this. And whether that's like legally good or bad, I don't know enough about, but it's totally understandable. Like, countries sanction each other over political reasons all the time. And yeah, like, as smarter people than me have said, like, maybe this is actually good news in the sense that they're taking us very seriously. Yeah, they're not ignoring us anymore.
Yeah, the side of regulatory clarity is, I mean, that is the big question. I think that's why, there's still so much hinging on the XRP case with the SEC. I just, it really seems to me as though a big change is going to come, not to speak like broadly and abstractly, but where protocols, kind of the type that we work on and we talk about, they are going to either be championed by the financial system or they're going to be targeted, and it's just a matter of time to see. That sounded very grim. That sounded very fatal.
Let me offer a potential utopia, too idealistic maybe, but again, like, if we can help people achieve financial independence, that should also translate to freedom of all the other things, such as movement, where to live, because once you can have enough to sort of start over without worry or fear, like, if a particular government or set of policies disagree with someone, then they have the option to just pack up and leave. And with, like, on-chain money, self-sovereign money, like, that has never been easier. And I hope that, with the advance of the different yields and, like, savings method we come up with, like, maybe it's not going to be overnight, but more and more we're going to lift people, especially the people who feel like they don't have options, into a place where they feel like they do. And if they choose to act on them, then yeah, like I don't think the governments are going to be able to enforce like people not entering and exiting. Anyway, like that's just way too dystopic. If we ever get to that point, we'll be having a different conversation.
Right, and I do think that as the end goal is, I mean, idealistic, yes, but also I think what most people genuinely and deeply want. I mean, okay, kind of fun aside question: if you could go and start over anywhere else, where would it be?
Oh, yeah. So right now, the few places I really want to visit and I haven't is Japan, Singapore, and Australia.
What a shock! An anime profile picture person wanting to go to Japan. I mean, same. It's literally the same answer. The reason I ask is I feel like, so many people are in this for so many different reasons. Be they like concrete, or abstract, and it really sounds to me like your like essential goal is like is self-sovereignty, is freedom. Would you say that's true?
Yes, because again, crypto has given me the power to make choices in my life that I felt like were not possible before, and it has been such a freeing and empowering concept. Even like it's the difference between being helpless versus being able to help yourself. Like even if you choose to do nothing, like knowing the difference in your head makes a huge difference, I think. And yeah, so like the absolute end goal of it all for me is for people to be free in whatever sense of free it means for them. But the most achievable part that I can influence is finding better ways for people to preserve and grow their wealth, and hopefully other freedoms follow.
I think that's such a great mission statement. put that on the Twitter bio. I just did a little mark there. I do have some fun questions if you wanted to go into a little lightning round of light stuff. Otherwise, we can spend a little more time on deeper stuff. But I I don't know if we want to go too far over an hour.
Yeah, let's do it. Lightning round.
Let's do it. Okay, and Mark. So for fun questions, just as off the top of your head, just gonna throw them at you. Who is your favorite poster on crypto Twitter? Doesn't matter how big they are, but like inevitably make their tweets make your day when you see them.
Right. So for this, I actually have to say Indigo, because he has been a tremendous influence on my crypto Twitter experience. Like one of the first posts I ever saw from him was just about getting stummy DMs, and I was like, "What is a stummy?" And things just went downhill from there.
It's funny. I really want that to be the answer slightly, because it's just going to be a simp chat. Because I feel that mine is the exact same way. Yeah, would you say that you took a lot of like I don't know, inspiration or like kind of early? One of my questions I actually had to you is like somebody who you think made a big impact on you.
Yeah.
Sorry, would you say that it would be Indy? He's gonna love to hear that.
Oh yeah, for sure. So like we've actually talked quite a lot, and it spanned a whole lot of topics, and it made me realize like how dynamic the space is. Like I had no idea who he is, like, even still. Like it's just some purple hair.
we know what some people, we know who some people think he is.
Yeah.
Maybe like a certain group
certain
of
founder of Major L1. Yeah. Basically, yeah, like the idea is like we talked about things ranging from like the deepest crypto technologies, like especially like roll-ups and MEV, all the way down to, like again, like poetry, cooking, and some just fun things in life or not so fun things in life.
I feel, I mean, you couldn't kind of ask for a better introduction to our specific corner of the space than our own kind of pseudo celebrity himself. favorite project that you're not working on? You know, a project that you like to look at that you think is like particularly inspiring or doing something right?
I mean, I have to show my bags, but yeah, sort of like tokamak. Like
Yeah.
it's so big brained for me that when I first heard about it, I just knew I had to put some money into it. I don't exactly understand what's happening under the hood. But yeah, like um, to I admit that my brain isn't that big. There's a lot in the space I don't understand. I do my best to try to figure out like what's the general idea and hope that it works to the degree and I assume it does. And I don't know, I'm sort of rambling, but it's like
No, I mean, it's a good, I mean, it is, I think that's a very good answer. And I
yeah,
also think that's a lot of people's answers. It's definitely one of my answers. Like I have
yeah,
even less idea about how it works, but I feel
right.
like I can't look away.
Right, yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, so the point is not about whether it actually is going to work or how profitable. It's just an idea that I've never heard before, and it's so, I guess, complicated and elegant that it makes me really curious to want to learn more. And I have dug into it like quite a bit, and I have to still admit that I don't understand it all. And that's sort of like the beauty of it, right? Like, if we have to draw analogies, it's like how well do most of us really understand a blockchain? Like, what does it
Right.
take to make a block? Like, how do the hashing algorithms work? Like, or like how like proof of stake actually how the stake actually works and what that actually like again like I feel like
Yeah, absolutely no idea about it.
yeah like
Yeah.
all these things they actually go so deep and it's like even as a non-technical person sometimes you see something and it just makes you so curious to find out more and I think that's the beauty of like this whole system and I'm just using tokamak as like the one that came to mind.
Mhm. Who do you think is the most underrated player in the game? Like, what person do you think does not get nearly enough credit either for their writing or their great takes or what they're building, what they're coding? Who do you think deserves one more recognition?
um can I say you because
Whoa. Okay.
well I mean
Well,
like
well, now, I mean, if you're gonna say that, then you have to defend that
Yeah,
thesis.
so
You're
so
gonna.
I'm gonna defend it in the sense that, like you're one of the most cultured people I've met in the sense that like not only do you like anime stuff, but you dig into the classics of multiple literary genres or I don't even know how to call them different from different cultural and historical backgrounds. Like it's so diverse and interesting and you are bringing something new into the space that, for example, with your Gogawa Poetry Club, like it's very inspiring to see. Like I just remember that one day you messaged me and it's like, okay, I'm working on something. I'm trying something out with NFT markets. And I was like, oh, okay. I wonder like what he's going to do. And then it's like the next day, it's like, Carn, I have something. It's going to work. And it's like, what? Like, that doesn't just happen, like um you yeah, I feel like you make a lot of things happen and that's one of the things I really love see just people having ideas and just running with them and like like poetry NFTs that is a crazy idea.
Yeah, it's really that's what's gonna lift me up out of abject poverty is the is the haiku,
Right, right.
uh,
um,
kimono textile
yeah.
work. I mean, not in a, ever to sound self-deprecating, I realized as I asked that question, I'm like, "Damn, what happens if Carn says me?" Then it does kind of look like I put together this whole podcast just
On
to be like,
purpose,
so
right?
just yeah, I'm like kicking my feet in the air, being like, who do you think is the coolest person at school? um,
Yeah, I
no,
actually
that's right.
have a
No, that's
cue card in front of me that says the answer is kids in
yeah,
case I forget.
it's been a script this whole time, and it all leads to that. Well, no,
Yeah.
that is very kind of you to say. It's
Mm,
funny. I feel like I have this very strong um desire for community, something that we talked about a lot. I have
mm,
this very strong desire to find a place to belong, and I feel very fortunate in the places that we found it. But I
mm,
definitely think it was a real question for me of all right, I'm not a technical person. I'm also not a
mhm,
trader. I am not particularly good at generating yield. So the
Mm,
poetry, just like, governance writing,
right.
or you make a lot of points about how much I love bureaucracy. Like those things all felt within my wheelhouse that I could do. So,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, it was I really can't take credit for the poetry thing because it was so much based on our conversations. And I remember early on, you and I just trading like funny poems in the public square. So I'm honored. I'm honored to be considered.
Right.
Hopefully one day I'll be rated. I don't need to be overrated, but I would love to not be underrated. I
Yeah.
want to get that just a couple more inverse bra retweets.
Oh, for
And
sure.
we're gonna make it to the top. What's your favorite
Or
cocktail?
what I'm drinking now actually is my favorite. So I have a drink in
Okay.
front of me. It's a Moscow Mule. I like it with
Okay,
a
there you
little
go.
more ginger, spicy taste.
I always feel like you can tell a lot about a person from their favorite cocktail. Why is it your favorite cocktail?
Oh, I don't like alcohol that's too bitter or burning, and this one is like chilled and sort of citrusy, and it sits just right. And I also think cocktails with a little bit of sweet and spice really make it pop. Yeah.
It's a good answer.
Sort of like personality. I like to be sweet, but a little bit spicy.
Yeah, that's about as good an answer on that as possible. Well, if there's anything else that you kind of wanted to conclude with, any plugs you want to make, any
Hmm.
shout outs, any
Yeah.
concluding thoughts?
So just one more thought as we answered the question before the cocktail one. It's like this, I guess, misconception that people in this space are traders. I know for a fact that most people in the space are not traders,
Yeah.
and most people in the space are not technical. So what the heck is it that we do, right? And the basic thing is we work together. There is a lot of work, a lot of different tasks and responsibilities and roles into making things happen. Like you don't just like put a dev in a basement and they come out with brand new products. You need people there to support them, and support, I guess, is a word that gets also a little bit of a bad rap because what working together is just people supporting each other. It's not that the VCs are on top or like the lead devs on our top. It's everyone can contribute something that they're good at or that nobody else is willing to do, and everything must be done for the project to work together smoothly and as a whole. So like if you're someone in the space who's listening to this and you don't have like the confidence or the knowledge to say like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do, but I just know like this space is interesting, I want to be here, like please feel free to reach out to me or to kids and our friends. Like we'd love to help get to know you a little better and see if like where we can help you go, like what your future ambitions are. Like we love to help people do that. And for me personally, it's because these people that I've met early on, like you, like Indy, who've really given me welcome into the space when I have done nothing to really deserve it. Like that was very generous and kind. And in a way, like I'm doing my best to also pay it forward.
I think that's a great takeaway. I think, and I think as a great like call to arms, as a great
Mhm.
message, and that's like, I think that is so emblematic of your work and what you do, and kind of the way that you engage people, and I think that is really the greatest strength. And I hope no one else does poetry NFTs because I don't need the competition. But if anyone, please reach out to either of us, to anyone, to just start building. I think maybe that's like the core aspect of it for me, which is not imagining that you don't have the skills is helping
Mm.
no one. You have something to contribute, and so everyone should in one way or another. And there's nothing like taking the leap and then creating an anonymous account one day and ending up making a great amount of friends who you get to collaborate with. I think that is a great joy and pleasure. It certainly has been personally. So
Absolutely.
all right, well, with that in mind, Carnation, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your time and sharing your wisdom. Please, everybody, go follow Carnation on Twitter. Keep an eye out for those amazing articles. Go follow Umami. I'm sure that there's so much in the works right now that it's impossible to kind of even touch on all of them. But yeah, just wanted to thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you, kids.
All right. Well, everybody, hopefully we'll have another episode up soon. On the off chance that I haven't completely destroyed this recording and decide to quit before I've ever even began. And hopefully try and do this again next week or two. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.